In 2022, I interviewed Will Worthey about his transition from library director to city manager. In that interview, Will shared how he never wanted to be city manager because he already had his dream job at the library. But as it turned out, there was no one better suited for the job, and Will reluctantly agreed to go from interim city manager to accept the full-time position. So in this episode, we'll be covering what has happened since Will was last on the podcast, the city council's yearly goals, the city's goal to reduce debt, and most importantly, how new changes in SDCs will allow for more affordable housing to be built, more business, and more childcare in Newberg. Hi, I'm Daniel Roberts, host of the Giving Town podcast, where we share stories of hope and generosity in Newberg and the surrounding areas. If you're a community leader, nonprofit volunteer or employee, service club member, or just someone who cares about this community, then this podcast is for you. We live in an amazing town full of incredible people who are always working to make Newberg an even better place to live. And this podcast is all about sharing those stories and helping the people in our town be inspired, get involved, and have hope for our future. I also have the Living in Newberg YouTube channel, which is all about what it's like living in Newberg, so you might want to check that out as well if you're interested in all topics about Newberg. This podcast is also brought to you by my real estate team, the Joyful Roberts Group, and it's part of our mission to serve this community not only by providing amazing service to our clients, but also to help Newberg be an even better place to live. So if you're looking to buy or sell a home anywhere around Newberg and want an amazing team to help you out, reach out to us. We'd be happy to serve you. Well, thanks for tuning in, and I hope you enjoy episode 50 of the Giving Town podcast with Will Worthey. All right, Will, thanks for joining me again on the Giving Town podcast. It's been a little over a year since we were doing this together after you'd kind of gone, or you'd had this stint for a little while at that point of going from being the library director to city manager. And now we've got a few other things to talk about. A big part of what we'll be covering today is the changes in some of the SDC code. So basically, the city is looking to encourage more affordable housing, wanting to really encourage new business without making it cost prohibitive. And one of the most important things is working on childcare, making that more affordable. But first, I'd love to hear about an update of what's been happening with you in your life. I know you've been working on a master's degree, which is no small feat. But yeah, how have you been, Will?
I've been good. I'll be honest, I've been increasingly more tired, I would say, during the last year and a half because I'm doing the master's degree on the weekends. It's the executive master's degree in public administration from PSU. And so all the homework, the meetings, the papers, they're either on the weekend or they're at night. I also have city meetings at night with the council and so on. So I'm becoming increasingly more and more used up as time goes on.
Do you ever sleep?
Not so much this last year and a half, but I am looking forward to that wrapping up. The defense of the thesis part of it is actually going to be in June, but substantively the degree ends in April and May. So for example, the last lectures are in April. They give us kind of May off for good behavior to work on our thesis, which they call the capstone process. So I anticipate being finished somewhere in the midpoint of next year.
I bet that's got to feel relieving to finally get that, or at least be within striking distance of that being past you. When did you start that program?
So that was a year and a half ago. It's basically a 2-year program, and it's a thing that's aimed at working government professionals. So it's the executive master's degree in public administration. So to qualify for the course, you already have to have been a leader in governance in some field.
Okay.
And have 10 years or more experience. And it's a way of fitting that degree in while still working. But to be honest, it's been a lot to try to do it. But I've kept my grades up. I'm on track to graduate. And there's been a few other things I should mention happened recently. I unfortunately had one of my dogs pass away, Josie. And that was kind of sad, although she was 14. And we got another shelter dog recently, Bertie. We've called the dog Bertie because nobody knows the dog's name. So found on the streets of Lafayette, and we got it from the McMinnville Homeward Bound shelter. So there's been a few changes there, but apart from that, just studying.
Yeah. And this is your second master's, right? Because your first was in
library science.
Library science. How does it compare?
Well, everything's changed. The first master's degree was 29 years ago, and it wasn't the fully digital experience. Doing citations and searches and things were all very hand curated. Now everything is on Canvas, which is the platform, the academic platform. Papers, quizzes, assignments, everything's digital. Citation generation is digitized. So it's kind of a very different experience than it was. And the classes, a lot of them are Zoom-based. Many of them are in person, but some are virtual. So I would say that this is a broader course. Maybe I would say a little shallower, because it doesn't have the time to delve deeply into any one area of government thinking.
Sure.
Whereas the library science course was very deep and narrow.
Yeah.
So cataloging, let's talk about cataloging all the way down.
Yeah. Do you feel like it's been valuable that you learned quite a bit from going through this process?
Yes. There was a class called Administrative Law, which was an eye-opener. There was a class on HR techniques, which was that was a bit more like a revision of what I knew, but it was still useful. And then just having to go through the academic rigor of starting work on my capstone has been interesting. The finance class I didn't learn anything from that really, but I saw some other different models of budget planning used by other cities. And it gave me more food for thought about the future. So perhaps some of those ideas may appear later.
Well, this is something that you did of your own volition, right? You just said, hey, I want more education, and decided to foot the bill. Is that how this all came about?
Yes, that's correct. So normally people have a master's degree in public administration to become a city manager. And as you and your listeners know, I didn't have that. So I decided that the right thing to do by the taxpayers of this town would give them a properly qualified city manager. So I leaned into this, and no taxpayer's money has paid for any of my tuition. I've paid for it all out of my own pocket.
Well, that is one of the reasons why I like having you on this podcast, is because it's not just about the city, and really the heart and soul of this podcast is sharing stories of hope and generosity, and your whole involvement with becoming city manager. I guess one way of putting it is I think a lot of people don't recognize the sacrifice that you made by giving up your role at the library to do something that was something you were good at, but wasn't where your heart was. And to me, I have a ton of respect for that, because that's one of the most generous things that you could do, is by, as Rotarians, we say the service above self. You chose to serve the city, and you were really the best person for the job and decided to take it. And I think it's rare to have someone, or at least it has been rare in Newberg's history, to have someone who has both integrity and competence, and you've done both of that. So I think you've gone above and beyond in many ways. And I always stress that to people, because some people, they think, oh, it's just another city manager who came in and wants to do this. I'm like, no. You don't understand Will's story. So I sometimes feel a little bit defensive on the inside.
Well, I appreciate that, because I do think it's slightly different. It's not the same old playbook. It's a little different. I care about what I'm doing. I'm not going anywhere else. Some people have said, once you have this new master's degree, are you going to go off to some big town somewhere else? I've made it perfectly clear. I'm not going anywhere. I'm here to serve this city, these people. And that's not going to change. And I do miss the library. I miss the library a lot. I haven't had a chance to be involved in any library things. After the graduation, though, I absolutely do plan to see if the library director will let me pick up some kind of programming event or do something in the library.
I was thinking, well, Corey's a great person as well. I know she would love to have you back at the library. I know that it has a special place in your heart, and I think you have a special place in their heart. I think I'm sure they all miss you and would love to have Mr. Will back.
I do wistfully look at the building sometimes out the windows of City Hall and wish I was back there.
So after you get your thesis all wrapped up, you can go back there. And then if Corey ever wants to retire, then maybe you can retire, quote, from city manager and take over there again.
At the very least, I can see myself when I'm retired volunteering in my local library. That's like, you can put money on that.
Yeah. It's interesting. Like I said, having someone who is willing to give up so much to be in the position you're at now. And has it been 4 years or has it been 3 years since you started as interim city manager?
So I started in 2021. So it's actually been 3 years. This is the third year.
Okay.
But my time with the city began in 2019. So that's when I became the library director.
So my timelines are mixed up in my head. What are you most proud of in your time being at the city?
I think the things that I'm most proud of are probably, first of all, the SDC reforms that we're going to talk about today. I'm also extremely proud of the complete overhaul of all of our software systems. The city is finally a modern digital enterprise, and there's going to be lots of powerful downstream advantages that come from all this software enhancements and changes, such as our ability to do better financial modelling in future years. If you don't have a fundamentally good accounts payable system, a modern one, then you can't really do good long-term planning. And we changed all of that. So those are two things I'm really proud of. One's internal, one's more external. And of course, I'm counting my chickens before they're hatched because the SDC package still has to come before council, probably in February.
Is there a risk of that not going through?
I don't think so. I think everyone's on board with it. It's resonated with the community, and the council that we have today is extremely ethical and very hardworking. And I mean that. So I don't think there's any doubt in my mind that they're in favour of these ideas because of the advantages that we hope to see realised.
Well, I'm personally excited. It is interesting, though. You mentioned a lot of the infrastructure changes that were made, and me having a background in engineering, and obviously in my current career in real estate, someone puts in $50,000 into the infrastructure of a house, but people come in and they often don't care because they, well, I just like the new paint and the shiny new counters, and like, yeah, but the infrastructure is so important.
Right. I mean, as an example, the Tyler technology, accounts payable, payroll system, court system, it's all integrated. So when you go to pay an invoice, you can click on a live link to that ledger line. You can look at the current encumbrance level. You can see what the recent payments were. It just gives you a much more profound and deep view on what you're doing financially every step of the way.
Yeah, that's it's interesting because I don't deal with accounts payable, accounts receivable, or any of that side of things, but I can tell that would be a valuable thing to have, that the citizens who understand can thank you and and hopefully recognize that they can pay their bills better, and that the city can be a better steward of the money that they have. I think that's really right. A big tool.
Because that system came out a year ago, this is the first year that we're going to be able to do more long-range planning, more trend lining, and that's based upon the bedrock of the new AP system.
It's speaking of long-term planning, one of the things the city does every year, is it every year they put together goals, or is there?
So actually, it's not quite like that. So okay. What typically happens is after a major election, there will be new council members seated, and then the council members will look at the existing list of council goals, and they will decide whether or not they want to create a revised list or modify the list. And in fact, this year, in January and February, brand new council goals were formulated. But we can expect that they will receive subtle tweaks every year until the next big election, at which point they may change entirely again, depending upon how things turn out.
How does that we were talking earlier about you as a city manager are essentially either the CEO or maybe COO, like Chief Operating Officer, and then the city council is more or less your board of directors. So they establish these goals and then you have to implement them. Mm-hmm. So to have goals and then have them completely revised seems like that would be a major headache.
So yes, you're right. I mean, one of the challenges of city administration to be a city administrator is that you know that your priorities may have to shift rapidly. You may have to be quick on your feet because elections can happen and things can change. But I think that as long as the elected folks are doing a great job and this group are doing a great job, I don't perceive that wild electoral shifts are likely to happen anytime in the near future for us.
Okay. And as long as people have some level of competency or ethical guidelines, if the goals are good, then they shouldn't change too much, you'd think. At least I would hope.
I agree. And the thing about the current goals list is they're not just lofty aspirational goals, as all too often these lists are. These are goals with operational objectives.
So can you share some highlights of what the goals are for this year? I know there's 7, and they break down quite a bit.
Mm-hmm. So one of the key ones is to create and maintain a high level of customer service. That has led us to working on a customer service manual and guide, follow-on trainings, and we're going to start assessing customer service expectations annually.
And by customers, this is people who might be coming in wanting a permit, or who are examples of your customers?
Everyone. So from the person who calls about a missing bicycle to the police department, to the person who has a late charge on a book, to a person, every conceivable thing that connects with the city.
Okay.
You are all our customers. And also we are each other's internal customers. So for example, engineering to finance, they have documents and they owe each other things, and that's covered too in the manual. And if your listeners would like a copy of the draft manual, not yet approved by council, I'd be glad to share that.
I can have a link to that in the description down below.
So other things off the top of the list, we're trying to identify industrial land and attract employers. And of course, we don't entirely have all the control over that because the mill site is privately owned and they're working to attract somebody that can buy large tracts of that land. We hope that goes well. Ensure the Newberg infrastructure, roads, water, and city employees are in good repair and supply.
Mm-hmm. I hate to interrupt, with the industrial land part, how, in my mind, I'm thinking there's either land that's industrial or not, unless it's rezoned. So what does that look like, actually identifying industrial land for?
So actually, we're in the early stages of trying to get an urban growth boundary expansion. And we're in the early stage because it's a long, multi-year process. We would like to see some of that new land, if we succeed, being brought into the city in the form of industrial land, ideally adjacent to the current mill site, where there is transformer power, water, and interstate communications. It makes a lot of sense. Now, we haven't gone further at this stage than reaching out to the farmers who currently own the land. They are receptive to the concept, but we're about to start working with the state to see whether or not we can achieve this goal.
So would this be expanding east?
Yes, slightly.
Okay. That would be, that makes sense because you're right, going through the urban growth boundary, urban reserve and all that, it's, a lot of people don't like to see farmland turned into industrial land, but that's the nature of people moving here. People always say, well, we don't want prices to go up on homes. We don't want there to be development. We don't want anyone to come here. And that's just not how healthy cities work. If your city population is declining, then it means you've got other problems. So that's just kind of where we're at. So that'll be interesting to see how that plays out.
So we all know, especially the councillors know that this one is in some sense aspirational, because a lot of the big decisions around this stuff will happen at the state level, not at the local level. But we're going to try our best to make this a reality.
So the state, and I should know this as a realtor, but the state is the one who says whether you can or can't change your urban growth boundary?
Ultimately, in a vast simplification, yes.
Okay. I'm always fascinated by this stuff, but I want to take up all of our time talking about new industrial land. So you can go back to infrastructure, and some of the other goals that we've got.
So one of the things that we're doing is we want to focus on some road and sidewalk improvements. We plan to improve downtown parking. Now that's going to be relatively easy because we've already started an analysis of the main municipal parking lot. We think if we can get it restriped, which we're going to do affordably by involving George Fox engineering students to do the design, that will increase the parking there. We also are wanting to enhance community safety. For that goal, we've already achieved one of the main things, which is to get a second school resource officer. So we were able to hammer out an amazing deal with the school district, whereby they would provide us with revenue for that second SRO, and in exchange, they would be allowed to use the city's fuel farm and gain almost $1 a gallon off the price needed to fill their buses.
Okay.
So this was my idea for something whereby we could offset their cost for the SRO by giving them operational savings. So it would be a wash for both parties, but we would achieve a council goal and they would get something they want.
That's great negotiating. Well, nice.
So that was a good one. Creating a high level of transparency with residents. We've already achieved some things there by starting a calendar which contains all of the public events in the city. It's one unified calendar. It's not a calendar just of city events. So Chamber of Commerce or Downtown Coalition events or cultural centre events are all on that calendar.
Calendars are hard. I know. Yes. I do event videos on my Living in Newberg YouTube channel. And then I know Newberg, we kind of work together in some ways to go back and forth on that. But getting all the different events, because sometimes events only live in people's heads.
Right.
It's hard to get all out.
So creating one unified thing is hard, and we have to constantly scan all the other organizations' calendars because they're not interoperable electronically.
Yeah.
Also on that one, we reformed the structure of the council information packets themselves to add executive summaries to the front of all of the packets to make them easier for residents to follow what they're actually about. We've added a rule that all documents have to have indexing and hyperlinks if they're over a certain size. Once again, for clarity, that they also have to have executive summaries. So we did some changes to how we actually have our documentation to get to goal number 5. Goal number 6 is to implement a careful and prudent fiscal policy. And objective 1 is to reduce our debt. We're going to talk a bit more about that. And also within goal 6 is to prudently lower system development charge fees, which we're going to talk about as well.
Yeah.
And then goal 7 is looking for bits of land that can potentially be rezoned within the city to residential if we can find some. We haven't done that yet. And also bringing land into the urban growth boundary, which we've already talked about.
And that will, I guess it's kind of a process of you're identifying land to bring into the urban reserve or urban, what was the phrase? Urban?
There's the urban reserve area.
Yeah.
And then there's an urban growth boundary area. And they're not exactly the same.
Right.
So reserve can be thought of as potential land that may become available next. Inside the growth boundary is the area that actually can be expanded into via applications and annexations of individual landowners.
So essentially, you have to start with urban reserve and then that gets converted into urban growth.
So the farmers that we've spoken to who have lovely, large, flat land areas adjacent to the mill site, that would become a potential expansion area first. Challenging because it is farmland. And if we're able to succeed with the help of the state and a Hail Mary pass, then we would expand that into the urban growth boundary later. Those would then be annexed in for industrial properties, we hope.
Which,
that sounds... Sometimes I've said we hope, and we'd like, and we think, we hope.
So something like that's going to be at least, 10 years away before anything really happens there?
I would say 5 or 6 years.
Okay.
To get some kind of resolution. And the resolution might be no.
Yeah. So 5 or 6 years to maybe get a no. This is why I can't do government work.
Welcome to Oregon.
Oh, man. Yeah, if it were Texas, they'd just start building tomorrow.
Just really run a gas pipeline right out there.
Yeah. All right. So we were just talking about SDCs, and that's what we're going to get into now. So recently you came on our YouTube channel, the Living in Newberg YouTube channel, and we're talking about some of the upcoming changes with the SDCs, which is the systems development charges. And you gave some brief highlights. But the big thing that this is ultimately going to do, and that most people care about, is ideally it will allow or encourage developers to build housing that's more affordable and in that way smaller. It'll help encourage new businesses to come in and bring in childcare. So can you kind of go over this process of where we're at right now?
Yes. So basically, there are 2 thought processes that came to fruition in the SDC reforms. The first thought process is simply to go through the existing model, to go through the existing holdings of the city and its planned future projects, redo the model, make sure it's accurate, and we suspected that some of the rates would go down when we did that, and they did. So the proposed rates are a little bit lower than what we expected before. The other part of it, which came out through the work of this ad hoc committee, because it was a council ad hoc committee, was the identification of themes or projects which might be ones that would resonate with the community to have certain positive effects. So first of all, let me delve into the programs a bit first.
Okay.
And then if you want, we can talk about math.
Okay.
So
we'll try out the math, and if it gets too... as an engineer, I should be better at math than I am, but we'll see. We'll see how it goes. Because I'm also very, very visual, so we're trying to do everything auditory. I don't want to lose everyone, but it is interesting how this all works.
So a keynote thing about programs was that transportation change of use system development charges, we felt were becoming a barrier to new business, but we're not in fact realizing any public revenue. In other words, the charges for a change of use, and I'm going to explain what that means in a moment, those charges were presenting customers with bills, potential bills that were stopping them from wanting to remodel or redevelop a unit, particularly in the downtown corridor. So by scrapping entirely that change of use fee for transportation, so that means, here we go. So if you have an office block, it has a median number of trips that it generates, and it's assessed from an engineering manual, and that number of trips would be relatively low because it's an office building. If that office building, and that becomes a charge, it's an SDC charge, if the building is remodeled to become a restaurant, its charge basis would be greatly increased because restaurants drive traffic, vehicular traffic, and so there would be a change of use SDC charge. But in real life, what was happening was the people who wanted to buy the brick and mortar store were seeing the charge that they would have to pay to remodel the unit, and they were changing their mind and they were not wanting to occupy that storefront. And we think that's part of the reason why we have empty storefronts in the downtown corridor. So the committee decided, after a lot of debate, that they would recommend to council that that was one of the charges that just be scrapped entirely. So that's off the table, but it wasn't making the city any money anyway. It was just discouraging business.
So an example of this, there's a new, or there's a couple new restaurant type businesses downtown. The one I just saw, there's a new juice shop. I'm trying to remember the name that just opened up. Right. And it is where it used to be an old birthing center. And so an example of something like that, I mean, what's an example? You're changing the use and now you're doing something where people going to come in all the time. And I guess currently these laws or rules are still in place, right?
Correct.
So what would something like that be for?
So if they were going from a clinic or an office type setting and they were changing to something that was assessed as having a lot more road damaging effect based upon the engineering manual, they might see a price tag of $30,000 or $40,000 for a relatively small unit. And a large enterprise might see a $200,000 or $300,000 charge associated with change of use. We felt that the city was not realizing those dollars for road repairs. So therefore, why are we doing this?
Yeah.
So that's the logic.
Okay. So that's the first one, transportation.
So the second one, and I'm going to take these, actually I've started not in the right order, but I guess the second one I think is the most important one, which is for housing construction. We're offering an across-the-board reduction, if it passes, on all SDC rates with a markdown of 75% for units that are 1,000 square feet or smaller. And conversely, for units of 2,200 square foot or larger, we were going to add a 0.25 tariff to make it revenue neutral. Mm-hmm. So our engineers played with a lot of different numbers and they came up with that being about the sweet spot for revenue neutrality. That would mean that if you had a cottage cluster or a duplex, a development like that, and it had 2 or 3 very small units, the total cost of that envelope of housing would be considerably cheaper per square foot than traditional house.
Have you guys also engaged developers about this? It was something I was thinking about in terms of development. If they look at it and say, okay, we can build 3 of these on any given lot, we can build 3 smaller ones and sell it for, X number of dollars, or we can take the hit in SDCs and build these ones. Have you talked to any developers about how this might affect their actual decisions and profitability, that kind of thing?
Yes. An owner of rental properties, Mr. Dean Worth, was in the committee, and Phil Higgins was also on the committee, who is a commercial real estate guy.
Good people to have on the committee.
They were there, and they felt that this had the potential to have a positive effect on moving that decision point. Should I make this area of a development cottage clusters, or should I make it single family houses? Should I make it duplexes? Collectively, a development could save many hundreds of thousands of dollars by choosing the smaller footprint and then get out of the way and let the market do its work. Because as you know better than I do, that smaller unit with a smaller footprint will have a lower market price.
Right. And there's a demand for it. There's 2 things I'm thinking of, and one we talked about is if you're an empty nester and you're wanting to downsize, a lot of times there's not many great options to downsize into. And so that's one, whether it's a 2-bedroom, 2-bath or 2-bedroom, 1-bath. And the other part of that is for people who are buying their first home. It may be a couple and they have a dog and they don't plan on having any kids. All they need is a small little home. They don't need 3 bedrooms and 1,800 square feet. They just need something that's small, but maybe they don't want to remodel. I've thought, yes, the price point would be lower, but if it's built well, and it's not going to be that much lower. I mean, the delta between 3-bedroom and 2-bedroom homes are often a lot less than what people might think.
Right.
The only reason that many 2-bedroom homes are significantly less is most of them are very old. There's not any ones that are built. So I'm hopeful that this will have a positive change
we don't see in this market right here, once again, you know better than I, but I don't see a lot of this type of housing getting built. And so anything we can do to incentivize developers or even small builders to do an infill or a project housing batch with some smaller footprints in the mix helps people get into that smaller unit.
One of the other things would be when you're on a small lot and you're dealing with setbacks and all these kinds of things, having a smaller home that you can put in there would be, or another way of looking at it is if you can fit 2 950 square foot homes in place of one larger home, and you can sell 2 homes instead of 1, you're going to make more money off of that. Plus, if you're not having to pay the charge.
So this is government getting out of the way of the market and incentivizing an effect that we would like to see happen with the help of the market.
Yeah. All right. So that's with the affordable housing piece. So ideally this will allow more small homes and therefore more affordable homes to be built.
Yes. And when I talked to the developers from our next big project, which is Polish Homes, coming into town soon, and I said, do you feel this would have an effect on you if you were thinking about appropriately sizing some of your smaller units? And he said, absolutely. They would choose that slightly smaller footprint to save those SDC charges.
Awesome. Because that's funny because I was thinking literally of that project, the Colina Springbrook. So
that conversation has been had.
Great.
And it was positive.
Well, that's encouraging too, because I one of the things I appreciate about our city is bringing in people who really know what's going on instead of saying, oh, this seems like could make sense, and doing it in the market being like, oh, you're not really solving the right problem there.
So I guess the third one I'd like to talk about is the daycare issue. So we've had a couple of really large daycare projects attempt to locate here in Newberg. We've been recognized within the county and the 3-county area covered by SEDCOR as being a desert for daycare, a challenging area for daycare. We know that parents are commuting great distances to get daycare. So we decided that we will take, once again, is it a hit? The projects haven't happened because the charges have been very high. The city hasn't made any revenue, but we haven't got the daycare either. So we've decided if this passes council, we've decided to offset 100% of all system development charges of all sorts on any licensed daycare establishment.
And that's the difference of
hundreds of thousands of dollars.
Quite a bit.
Yes, $200,000-$300,000 for a medium-sized daycare.
And really, that should be the difference that would make a solution viable or not viable for an organization coming to do this. And I've talked to several large businesses or companies or corporations, whatever, here in town who have wanted to work on these projects because they've got many employees who need a place to have daycare and can't. And it's provided a very challenging issue. So I'm really hopeful that this allows some of that to start happening. So, and I'm sure you're in communication with some of these entities as well. And do you feel that once this passes, assuming it does, that we'll start seeing some developments?
I will be very sad indeed if a couple of years after this, if we don't see this by 2026. If we don't see at least one big daycare unit coming in, maybe 2, that will be very disappointing. So I mean, my eyes are fixed on that. We were backed in these proposals by both Habitat for Humanity and by SEDCOR. So this raft of proposals that the council is looking at now were backed by those entities who are concerned about economic development and housing affordability.
One of the other interesting things when you're dealing with anything tax-wise is when you can attract, sometimes we joke about like Texas and, you can just do whatever you want. And there's something interesting about when there's low amounts of regulation, it causes issues, and there's low taxation, you can have issues, but it draws more people in and you get more net workers who then are they have jobs, and then there's more taxes from there just being more people paying taxes. There's kind of that fine line, and I feel like you can kind of pigeonhole yourself into, once you go too far down a route of over what's we're tightening restrictions, then it can be really difficult to loosen some of those. But it's cool to see some of these things moving in the right direction, and ultimately I'm hopeful as well.
Yeah, and I should mention just one last one briefly. We're also hoping to bring in a package that allows SDC credits to be more easily transferred within one development. That might have some effect also on housing affordability. It will certainly make business more efficient. So if you have a project like the Polish project that will have 2 or 3 phases, if they do extra road work or extra pipe enlargements that they don't need to do, they can benefit the city without it costing the city taxpayers anything. Those can become system development credits that could then be transferred to the next phase of their development.
Gotcha. Okay. So right now, each phase is just treated completely separately?
Correct.
Okay.
It's an open and closed ledger for just that one piece of a wider plan.
Yeah, that does seem like it would make a lot of sense.
Now, we had an even more wild idea, but the committee didn't want to do it, which was to start a kind of a SDC floating pool of transferable credits that could be bought and sold on the open market. But that didn't fly.
Yeah, that would get very interesting.
We decided the logistics of tracking the bond numbers would be a nightmare.
Yeah, that, and also a lot of times really things with great intentions, sometimes the implementation doesn't always work out. And then sometimes bad actors will sometimes take advantage of.
Right. We decided that was a bridge too far.
Yeah. All right. So we talked about the math, and I'm kind of hesitant to get into this, but like, how do the SDCs actually work? I mean, you talk about this uber complicated, I can't even pronounce it, uber complicated algebra. So, I mean, what's an example of one of these formulas that you're using?
So the best way to do it is, so I don't lose the thread, is to walk through it. I brought some information here, so I'm going to go through it again. So there's basically 2 parts of this that get added together to become the system development charges. One is the reimbursement fee, which is for extra load that you're putting on the existing system. And when we say system, we mean an entire system, not a given pipe. It's the pipe system or the road system. And then there's the improvement fee portion, which is to pay for part of a future project, future things that everybody's going to be buying into. And A plus B is added together to make your SDC charge for a certain SDC type. So, for example, transportation SDC is roads, the extra wear you're adding to the current road, and money needed to build the roads that we need that have already been identified.
So basically, as you're driving on a road, you've got people coming in, that road's going to be worn down, and eventually it's going to need to be replaced. Mm-hmm. So you're kind of paying for what you're using, and then the additional use that you're going to have on it. So that ultimately, when it's replaced, there's money so that it can be replaced.
And that's A. And then B is other roads that are in the capital improvement plan that have been identified that the city needs.
Okay.
Everybody is also helping pay for those.
Okay. So say we need a new road connecting somewhere in town, and then all the SDCs that have been paid so far is what funds that?
Yes.
Okay.
So that's level 1.
Okay.
So let me cut to the chase. So if you think of A plus B, then A, that means that reimbursement portion is the unit cost of the additional system required to get to a build-out time. That's when the city has all of its systems built out, usually on a 30-year horizon. And so it's the value of the infrastructure already in or on the ground divided by the additional amount of that thing, whatever that thing is, for example, millions of gallons of water, that division is the math. So A equals the value of the infrastructure that already exists divided by the additional amount of that thing to get to maximum capacity. So each model is imagining a future state.
So imagine, like you use the example of millions of gallons of water. So imagine we're talking about a water system. So just like with a hypothetical, imagine everyone wants, Trader Joe's to come in. So imagine they're building their thing. Hypothetically, say Trader Joe's came in and you're calculating SDCs for the water, just using fake numbers. What would something like this look like?
Well, in terms of, actually, there's no way to answer that directly. Okay. I'd have to say that if the fee was $10,000 because of water, which is based upon the thing in the case of water is appliances, that's faucets and so on.
Yeah. So basically, they're going to need to use 10 million gallons of water a year, for example.
Right.
I have no idea what the number is.
Right. Then the portion for this charge, the portion that is the load on the system, that's one part. And then the second part is how much additionally the system will need to get to its build-out year.
Okay.
So it's the load that you're doing plus what the system has to grow to get to its final build-out.
Right.
And in the case of water, the calculating thing is faucets.
Right.
Toilets.
So they've got
fixture units.
So they've got a certain number of fixture units. And you say, okay, you guys are going to be based on the fixtures. We're guessing you're going to need, 10 millions of gallons of water a year, and then the build out for the city is 100 million. These numbers are probably wildly inaccurate.
Well, actually, they're not as wildly inaccurate as you might think.
Okay.
Because, for example, on a given month, we might manufacture 78 million gallons of clean water.
Okay.
So that 100 million number you just said isn't a magnitude off, right, for a month.
Yeah. So then you look at the build out of like, hey, by, within 30 years, we need to have the capacity for 100 million a month per se. Right. And so then you have to pay your share up.
Delta might be 20 million, for example.
Yeah. Okay.
The key thing here is each of these models goes with a different SDC because the calculating thing is different.
You got roads, you got water, you've got gas.
Water, potable water, non-potable water, but not parks because parks belongs to CPRD.
Right. Well, if someone wants to get more in depth in this, they can get the spreadsheet from you, right? You can.
Well, here's the other cool thing, right? You don't have to take my word for it. If you want to see the spreadsheets, email me and I will send you the models. And then you can plug in square feet of impervious road surface or drive surface. You can plug in fixture units and you can see what your charges would be. And you can follow the math over to the two tabs, the current system tab and the future system tab. And we will own the models.
Yeah, which is one of the great things that I know we didn't even get into, that normally this is some consulting company that comes in and does all this math and they own the model. So it takes a long time to change them or to, and I guess the other part of this is something mandated by the state. Like this is not just something that Newberg came up with.
No, the basic system of current system increase versus future system requirements, those two parts of each model, that's all set by state law.
And every city is dealing with this. So people complain about high SDC costs here and everywhere except, we don't have all the data for McMinnville. They have their own kind of power and gas thing, but we're fairly competitive with other cities.
Yes, and after this reform passes, we will be more competitive than any of our neighbours on SDC rates. The other important thing about owning your own models is you can update them every 2 years, which is what we plan to do. So if we have built some of these things in the 30-year build-out, we can remove them from the model, and that will make the model cheaper. Conversely, if the public want a new thing to be built, we can add it to the model and the rate will go up. We can also, on that second from last tab, depreciate every 2 years our existing assets. So we get control of our own destiny and our own intellectual property.
And speaking of destiny, because we're about at the end of our time here, but one of the major things that you've championed and the council has championed is reducing the city's debt, which is really hard when we're also trying to build a multi-million dollar water plant that turns out is way more expensive than we had anticipated because of hyperinflation. So we don't have time to get into the water plant. Suffice to say that it was going to be built, and now we're trying to figure out what to do because it's going to cost way more, right?
Double.
Yeah. So it went from
$21.5 million to over $40 million in a span of 3 years due to hyperinflation.
Which is just ridiculous. So anyway, that's kind of on the table for now. Okay, we don't know what's going to happen there. But in terms of reducing the city's debt, why do you feel like that's such an important goal to have?
So it actually not only does it tie into trying to build massive infrastructure like a water plant retrofit or a new water plant, whatever way it turns out being now, because we're going back to the drawing board, okay?
Mm-hmm.
But just the sheer fact that every year $3.5 million of revenue is used on debt service. $3.5 million
per year on debt
every
service.
year in, year out,
which is money down the toilet, effectively.
Which is to some extent. No, actually, it depends who you ask. Some people say, and I don't agree with this. So if you're listening, you know who you are. Some people say that they believe that debt is good for our city because it means that future residents who haven't arrived yet have to share in the pain of the thing that the city built. That they're inheriting a part of the debt for the system, and therefore they're on rates, they're paying for the debt, so that's fair because they weren't here when the thing got built. I utterly disagree with that. So if the city is spending $3.5 million a year, as it is, if people arrive in the future and some of the debt has been got rid of, that's better for everybody. I'm not going to hold it against somebody because they arrived in the city in a better time than where we find ourselves today. I don't see anything good from having debt. So why does it matter? If we could eliminate our debt, it would give us more capability to deal with and take care of capital items with cash. It's really common sense, rather than having to put them on the credit card.
So what could say we didn't have to pay $3.5 million per year, what could we do with that money?
Well, there's a wide range of things because we're mostly talking about dollars that we could collect in the general fund. In other words, if some of these debts were paid off, it would have downstream positive effects on the general fund. That's money that could be spent in any way that we want. It could be we might, over 2 years, save up money for another road project and do it with mostly cash. We might have to do some very small amounts of debt servicing, but the sort of debt servicing that we could pay off in a year or two each time, rather than carry for 10 or 15 years, which is what we have been doing. We'd be more agile, we'd be able to build infrastructure, we'd be able to do it affordably, we wouldn't be wasting money on interest. So, to my perspective and to the council goals perspective, this is something that we want to try to do.
Yeah. You got your work cut out for you because something has to happen with making sure we have water too. And I know that's, again, we don't have to get into all that, but that's just kind of the nature of...
I suspect we'll be meeting again to talk about what we're going to do on the water plant once we have a better idea of what to do. Right now, we're regrouping and thinking about every possible angle.
Yeah. Well, Will, I appreciate your time today. It's been great hearing your perspective. And I've heard some of this presentation a few times, but I appreciate all you do for our city, for the people here. And one of the questions I like to ask to everyone who comes on the podcast is, what gives you hope for the future of Newberg?
I think if I can have anything to do with it, with the help of this really hard-working council, if we can continue to aim for a really balanced economy, to have a place where people can not have as much burden of debt that is invisibly around all of our necks, that gives me hope.
Let's work forward together. Or was it move forward together? Forward together. Sorry. And I just had him on the podcast not long ago and I butchered his line again.
And I tell you what, there's few more hardworking mayors, I think, than that bloke.
Well, thank you, Will. We appreciate you. We appreciate Mayor Rossacker. We appreciate the council and look forward to continuing to make Newberg a better place to be.
Thank you.
Thank you for tuning in to the Giving Town podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider sharing it with a friend who you think might benefit from hearing it. While more and more people are continuing to hear about this podcast, I still need your help to spread the message about all the people and organizations that make Newberg so great. Well, thanks for tuning in, and I'll catch you in the next episode.